I'm curious if anybody has heard of or read the book 1985. And that's not to be confused with Orwell's 1984, by the way. I know there's one person in here who'll be aware of the book, Derek, because I gave him a copy a few months ago. You're not ready yet. But here is the book. It's by Anthony Burgess, and you'll probably be more familiar with his book, A Clockwork Orange, which was obviously made into a film by Stanley Kubrick. Burgess's 1985 seems to have slipped into obscurity, falling through what Orwell's 1984 so unforgettably termed the memory hole. For those unfamiliar, in Orwell's novel, the memory hole is the chute through which Winston Smith disposes of any printed material that the party wants to erase from existence. Orwell's novel begins with an iconic opening line. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. That sentence sort of draws you in. It starts normally enough, then in a few words you're confronted with a reality that's unnerving and unconventional. The abnormality isn't just in one clock, but in all of them. And for me, this signifies a deeply broken society. Now, Orwell's brilliance lies in how he encapsulates a pervasive sense of dystopia. But it's Burgess's multifaceted vision of dystopia, political, cultural, spiritual and physical, that's the theme of my talk. In my judgment, Burgess, although not as iconic as Orwell, captures a more realistic dystopian power structure, one that is equally frightening and just as compelling as Orwell's. In a way, it's more chilling than 1984 because it's conceivable that Burgess's vision may in part become reality. While Burgess doesn't achieve the same literary appreciation as Orwell, he takes the story in a unique direction, making 1985 more than a mere homage. Sadly, despite its merits, 1985 has been largely ignored. This may be partly because the book is unusual in structure. It's essentially two works in one. The first half is a collection of essays by Burgess analysing Orwell's 1984, while the second is a short novel offering Burgess's dystopian vision of the future as he saw it from the 1970s. The short novel imagines a society spiralling into chaos. Published in 1978, his predictions for the future feel disturbingly prescient. Sadly, the book has been overshadowed. In fact, even at the time of its release, it was overshadowed. Quite frankly, without Burgess's reputation as an established author, I'm doubtful that this bold and controversial work would have found a publisher at all. Now, here's a quick synopsis of the story. Burgess's dystopian vision unfolds in a Britain overwhelmed by societal collapse. The protagonist, Bev Jones, navigates a grim and chaotic world. Early in the novel, he is mugged by a gang and learns his wife's hospital has been destroyed in an arson attack. Burgess paints a bleak picture of a society undone by ideological extremism, government overreach, and cultural decay. In this world, intellectualism is frowned upon, individuality is stifled, and equality of outcome is imposed at all costs. Even personal freedoms, such as consuming alcohol, have been stripped away in favour of a rigid system influenced by semi-religious laws. I'm guessing some of you may already find this quite familiar. Some of Burgess's predictions seem curiously relevant. For instance, he describes a society where traditional education has been replaced by indoctrination. Bev meets a group of disenfranchised young people who rebel by secretly learning Latin and Greek, an iconic reaction to a system that discourages critical thinking. At first, this idea struck me as absurd, but then I thought of modern figures like Jordan Peterson, whose teachings inspire a kind of intellectual resistance against prevailing narratives. Burgess's foresight here is undeniable. Bev's journey leads to a dramatic courtroom scene where he challenges the corrupt legal and social system. Convicted on dubious charges, he's sentenced to re-education, a process that aims to strip him of his principles and individuality. Burgess uses this as an opportunity to explore themes of justice, hypocrisy and ideological tyranny. Bev's speech to the court, in which he decries the selective application of justice, resonates powerfully. In Burgess's imagined Britain, unions wield unchecked power, though you could just as easily substitute any group dominating society's moral and political discourse. Radical Islam, trans ideology, corrupt policing, two-tiered justice, Ofcom, censorship, etc. Such groups currently rule our societal discourse today. Burgess's world is grim, and the novel offers no happy resolution, yet, despite its dark themes, 1985 serves as an important warning, and that's indeed how Burgess read Orwell's masterpiece, as a warning against tyranny, a wake-up call for the masses to reject the dismantlement of their heritage, freedoms and culture. But Orwell's protagonist, Winston Smith, was ready to confront the system. Indeed, Orwell hoped readers themselves would confront the system. Burgess's 1985, however, reflects a reality many would prefer to ignore, particularly his critique of Britain's cultural trajectory and the dangers of ideological dogma. His main protagonist, Bev, was demoralised by the system and uncertain how to fight back. 1984 was a vision that people could unite against, regardless of background. 1984 was a stark warning for humanity, a world engulfed in perpetual war. But Burgess's 1985 sounded a different warning. It wasn't power for power's sake, a perpetual conflict between superpowers, Oceania, Eurasia and East Asia, that locked the world into a constant global war for no conceivable reason than the acquisition of power itself. Burgess's vision manifested itself purely in Britain. The social decay and lawlessness was localised to our society. I read earlier the opening lines of Orwell's 1984, iconic in my opinion. Here's the opening lines of 1985. It was the week before Christmas, Monday, midday, mild and muggy, and the muezzins of West London were yodeling about there being no God but Allah. Orwell's grim vision of a dystopian future resonated deeply in the West and reflected the fears that many were already grappling with. In contrast, Anthony Burgess's 1985 has largely been overlooked, likely because it portrays a world, especially in Britain, that many would rather not confront. Here's an example. A man recently was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison for breaking the nose of a police officer during the disturbances after the Stockport massacre. The lads who broke the nose of the police officer at Manchester Airport still have not been charged. One of the key themes in the novel is the rise of Islam as a dominant cultural and religious force in the country. This theme is intricately tied to his critique of political correctness, cultural accommodation, and the erosion of traditional Western values. Burgess was concerned with the way he saw it. The West was becoming decadent. As Christianity declined, something would fill the void. That void was Islam. And in 1985, the populace are placated with drugs because alcohol is banned under an encroaching semi-Sharia system. Burgess also imagined the Labour Party rebranding itself as New Labour, a prediction that might make us wonder if Tony Blair ever read the book. What Burgess couldn't foresee, however, was the rise of Margaret Thatcher and her battle against the unions. The novel portrays an influx of immigrants as a consequence of Arab financial influence reshaping Britain. The Dorchester becomes Our Dorchester. Claridge's is renamed Our Claridge's, and soon Great Smith Street houses the Masjid al-Haram, or Great Mosque of London. This new reality is marked by stringent immigration laws relaxed to favour Islamic communities, deemed necessary to secure Arab patronage. Again, does this sound familiar? This future reflects a Britain that our political masters do not want to confront and will ignore and neglect, even though the British public want an honest debate. Yeah. Islamic influence has expanded both culturally and economically. This shift is portrayed as a consequence of political expediency and financial necessity. Arab wealth plays a significant role in the narrative, with wealthy Islamic nations investing heavily in British infrastructure, properties and businesses. In other words, Burgess confronts the shift to globalism and its calamitous consequences for both our culture and our economy. Although Burgess could not predict future cultural and economic shifts, just look at this recent headline in the Daily Mirror. And I quote, "Billionaire Mr. West End wins permission to turn famous London landmark into a mosque." The headline refers to the Trocadero in London's famous West End, our capital's entertainment district. The developer of this project is Aziz, who is from Malawi. Incidentally, the predominant religion of Malawi is Christianity, and I wonder if they would allow the building of a super mosque in their country. This theme reflects Burgess's view of the potential consequences of Britain's reliance on foreign capital and the resulting cultural compromises. He portrays a society where immigration policies have been relaxed to favour Muslim populations as a political response to Arab economic influence, leading to an increased presence of Islamic customs and institutions. The construction of the Great Mosque of London serves as a powerful symbol of this transformation. And it looks like the Great Mosque of London, as Burgess writes, will actually be in the heart of our capital city very soon. Burgess never stops returning to Orwell's classic 1984. And when you consider that Orwell said, and I quote, "The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history," it's easy to understand why Burgess keeps referring to Orwell. In 1985, an act of rebellion is to read Greek and Latin, languages that provide us with a linguistic legacy, a foundation in which British culture flourished. Through its dystopian vision, the novel encourages readers to reflect on the delicate balance between their culture and that of newcomers who seek to either deliberately or unwittingly displace our culture. The novel does not depict this cultural shift as harmonious. Instead, Burgess highlights underlying tensions and the sense of alienation felt by those who perceive their cultural identity as being eroded. This conflict is embodied in the character of Bev Jones, who stands against the prevailing ideological tide. Bev resents the imposition of Islamic and politically correct values, which he feels marginalise traditional British identity and freedoms. The tension Burgess explores extends beyond religion to encompass broader societal changes. Islamic customs, such as the prohibition of alcohol under semi-Sharia law, are shown to conflict with long-standing British traditions. Burgess uses this as a metaphor for a society that has surrendered its individuality and values in the face of external pressures and internal complacency. 1985 challenges readers to recognise how incremental shifts advance economic globalism, bureaucratic control and cultural apathy and collectively lead to a dystopian reality. The novel calls for a proactive defence of such risks and influences. If you have the chance to read 1985, it's definitely worth your time, ladies and gentlemen. Though it's not a lengthy book, it's rich with thought-provoking content, while some critics have dismissed it, of course, as just right-wing propaganda. I believe 1985 holds significant value, particularly in today's world. But fair warning, it's not a light or uplifting read, but it's certainly an enlightening one. Thank you.